Well, now we move to 3 shorter presentations before we, I hope, have time for a little bit of discussion around the floor. And I could, I'm afraid, fill up all of the remaining time by giving you a biographical sketch of the extraordinary achievements of our next 3 speakers. I hope that they will forgive me if I'm very brief in order to leave time for what I think is perhaps a very important part of this seminar, which is our conversation. Let me therefore introduce first Pierrot Chipolini, who is, am I introducing the right person?
That was good enough. Cipollone, anyway.
Yes, sorry. I do apologize. Pierrot actually very graciously helped me practice saying his name correctly before the session, and now I've failed in my only task. Pierrot is a member of the governing board and deputy governor of the Bank of Italy. He studied economics at Sapienza and then at Stanford University, and he's a visiting scholar at the University College Berkeley. He's had many senior roles in the Bank of Italy and the World Bank, and has been economic advisor to the Prime Minister. He also has contributed very significantly on the academic front as an author and co-author of many articles and papers on trade, labour economics and education. And he's going to talk to us this morning about financial inclusion as an enabling factor in social development goals and financial education as an empowering competence for the vulnerable and underserved. Pierrot.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor to have the opportunity to speak in front of such a distinguished audience. I don't want to take much of your time because it's important that we discuss. So let me go straight to my point. It's not a case that in a panel like this, you have 2 central bankers speaking. This somehow testifies the importance that finance has in this new world and in the pursuit of what we are trying to discuss today, which is a fairer, more supportive and more inclusive world. So what does an institution like mine, a central bank, has to do with the theme we discussed today? This is a special year because, as you know, Italy holds the presidency of the G20, and the central bank and the finance minister have a central role in shaping the agenda. We are almost at the end of the year, so we can kind of take stock of what we have done, which has much to do with what we are discussing today. So, first of all, in this year we have achieved a huge, important result, which is it's a floor on global taxation of multinationals. You know how long it has taken to achieve this, and this is a major result because most of those resources will be used to support the most vulnerable and the less fortunate people around the world. So we consider this a major achievement. A second important achievement is the final agreement on some action on climate change. As you know, we achieved a result to relaunch the Sustainable Finance Working Group, which is co-chaired by 2 major global players in make sure that we will be able to achieve a more sustainable world. I mean, US and China. This was a great, very important achievement. Finally, we were able to put around the table around the issue of global health, which we have been discussing and conducting a war in the last 2 years. So we were able to put together the finance minister and health minister to speak together so that we can move along on this path, which is so important. Some countries almost at the end of the tunnel in terms of fighting COVID-19. Many others are still in the middle of the pandemic crisis, and we have a responsibility to help, because as has been said, we will never be safe if we are not all safe. Let me go quickly to another point, which is more specific, very specific to central banking, but is so important for the achievement of a fairer and more just world. I mean financial inclusion. As an institution, we have been working very closely with the FSB to implement this, which is called the G20 roadmap on cross-border payments. It seems an issue or a discussion which is very far away from what we are discussing today. Indeed, is not. You know how important is the remittances for poor countries to help them to shape their destiny. For what we know, it's not clear how much it is the global remittances. People are speaking about 550 billion euros a year, but this is probably underestimated because it doesn't cover everything. So we are talking about big chunk of money that is transferred from, say, by immigrants, and this poor family have to pay a high price to transfer this money. You know that there is this target of reducing the costs to 3% by 2030. So people are paying, today the estimate is that people are paying from 5 to 10% of each transfer to transfer $200 across the globe. So helping people to move their resources quickly around the world would be a great achievement to help the poorest to enjoy the reward of their work. So along this line, we have been working very closely with the FSB and the G20. The FSB has just published concrete target to reduce the cost of the transfer, increase the speed, the transparency, and the accessibility of people for this. There is another issue. How do we do that? How do we allow people to transfer quickly? I'm sorry if I speak of very specific issues, but I think, you know, if we don't get to the nitty-gritty of some specific action, we will never make big achievements. So allow me to be very concrete, I will conclude with this. In order to transfer resources from one side of the world to another, it takes costs, it's very costly, takes time, you don't have the certainty. So as a Bank of Italy and in collaboration with ECB, we are trying to do something concretely with this, which is to connect fast payment system around the world. We just concluded an experiment with Buna, which is the fast payment system of the Arabic world, in order to connect Europe with the Buna country. Now it takes, at technical level, we were able to achieve this result. In 5 seconds, we will be able to transfer money from anywhere in Europe to anywhere among these 16 countries that belongs to Buna. So I think those are very concrete examples of what we should be doing in order to make a small but continuous step toward the solution of the problem we have been talking about today. Thank you very much.
Pierrot, thank you. And I very much valued hearing about that concrete example. I think it's a really good case study in the discussion that I hope we're going to have. I hope you'll allow me to move swiftly on to Daniel Gustafsson's presentation. And then I hope we can return to questions for all of you at a later stage. Daniel retired in 2020 as the Deputy Director General of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, but he continues as a special representative of the Director General. He has 40 years' experience of working on natural resource management, following a BSc and MSc at the University of Wisconsin and his PhD in Maryland. And Daniel's going to be talking to us today about the importance of cooperation in fighting hunger and poverty. Daniel.
Thank you very much, Nick. And it's really a tremendous privilege for me to be able to speak to you today. But when I received the invitation, I think I was even more excited about being a listener, because I know from previous experience how energizing the discussion is, and certainly we've seen that this morning, and I hope that our panel can continue in that regard. So I thought I would just say a few words from the perspective of FAO, and really more broadly from perspective of kind of international organizations working on hunger and poverty, as it relates to the themes of solidarity, cooperation, and responsibility, which I think have always been important, but I think in this post-COVID era are really essential. FAO, as many of you know, was created in 1945, after the war, after the Depression, a group of visionaries, really, who had a vision of cooperation and solidarity and responsibility as putting together intergovernmental work with the goal in mind of freedom from want. And of course, they focused, even in those days, on science and technology and production and productivity, but the driving idea was freedom from want, addressing hunger and poverty. And it was really a beautiful vision that I think matches what Pope Francis lays out in Fratelli Tutti, and kind of the vision from an earlier era. It did not take long, however, for the complexities of the multilateral intergovernmental work to run into the inherent problems and complexities. It is, of course, a membership organization with member states, and in our case, unique in the UN system. We're proud to say that the EU is also a member of FAO, the only UN agency that's the case, with a secretariat. And the way that those two parts of the organization work together is often complicated, and what the membership wants and how this works towards consensus is inherently complicated. The first Director General of FAO, John Boyd Orr, from Scotland, tremendous visionary, went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize, which not many people even in FAO know, I think. He resigned after 3 years. What he wanted from countries, he couldn't get. And what he wanted, I think, in many ways is similar to what we have had in the past. But it did not take long to kind of get into those difficulties, and he resigned in frustration. But there has been tremendous progress since those days in reducing hunger and poverty. And I think in many ways, even over the course of my own career, I don't think I would have thought possible the progress that has been made in many ways in that period, but we are far from on track. And with even without COVID, we were not on track. The number of chronically undernourished in the world has been rising since 2014. It went down steadily for a long time, largely due to the unprecedented progress in China in reducing poverty and hunger. And since 2014 was rising before COVID. Poverty had been going down, inequality going up. So lots of problems that need to be dealt with, and we are not on track. We're not doing what needs to be done. So I'd like to highlight then three themes on kind of how we approach this, and maybe what we've learned over the years since 45 on that. And the first theme is that marginalization is at the heart of poverty and hunger. It is the cause, not simply a characteristic of hunger and poverty. And this Professor von Braun wrote a seminal book on this topic and mentioned it in his talk, but I'm sure could have spent his entire talk on this morning on that, on the topic of marginalization, in the sense of people who are in this complex knot outside at kind of the margins of economic, social, ecological systems that don't permit them to constrain their choices, don't permit them to benefit from economic growth, block them from accessing services, assets, investments, and so on. And if we can find the way or design programs that would overcome marginalization, we can get at the causes that lead to hunger and poverty. And that marginalization is a key factor. Very interestingly, and I know some of you were there a few weeks ago at Fordham University when the Fondazione Centesimus Annus had an event where Angus Deaton spoke. And he spoke surprisingly about, not surprisingly that he spoke on this, but about what would be a surprising characterization that around 2/3 of the US population, those without university degrees, fit that Professor von Braun's definition of marginalization. So we're quite a different point on the wealth spectrum, but in fact have been excluded and are increasingly excluded from the benefits of economic growth, leading to what he and the lead author, his wife, Ann Case, have written about the deaths of despair from alcohol, drug use, and suicide that have been sufficient in the US to actually reduce life expectancy at birth between 2014 and 17, period way before COVID. Because of those deaths of despair, life expectancy for everyone in the US has gone down. And this sense of alienation, not benefiting from social cohesion, definitely relative deprivation, but more a sense really of marginalization from the benefits of what's happening to what they call the well-credentialed, which are essentially us, I think, that those without university degrees are able to participate in, lead to this sense of frustration and animosity that we see come out. So I think that it is certainly not, marginalization is a problem that affects not only, let's say, the extreme poor, where it is in fact the kind of the driving force, but we need to look at it all over. The second aspect I'd like to talk about, the lesson, is that addressing hunger and poverty requires, of course, cooperation, but cooperation that has to go hand in hand with solidarity. We often think of development cooperation as funding, and which it is, and it's a good expression. And the EU, I have to say, is in fact a reliable partner. That's absolutely true. And in my own case, for the countries that I've worked in, reliable not only in sort of quantity, but in continuity of funding. So that programs that have started long ago continue to be followed, continue to be funded, because many of these issues are in fact very long-term. But beyond that kind of development cooperation, we know, we've learned that it only really works as an outsider when there is, when you rely on engagement, you listen, the participation of the community that drives this. It's not always easy to accept, but it is in fact true, and it's practical. You have to listen, you have to engage, and the communities have to really be in the driver's seat, including indigenous knowledge and so on. But it isn't only for communities and poor people, it's also true for governments. I think in whatever country I've worked in, most, if not all, of our good interventions, even though based on science and technology or policy and so on, all of them came from local counterparts who had a great idea. We added to the coalition, we provided visibility, credibility, extra ideas, and so on. But it is solidarity and it is cooperation in a very practical sense that is that drives it. The third theme is that we also know better than we used to know, I think, that if we can combine as part of the process, when we address simultaneously divisions and overcome those divisions as part of the work we're doing together with whatever else it is, we can make great progress. If you work with women's groups, particularly if they are from different religious groups, working on conflict often over water, land, and so on, or planting material, whatever it is, if you can work while you are working on the technical side in ways that overcome divisions among them, you really make progress. And this kind of development, humanitarian peace nexus, I think we've really only scratched the surface on. The reverse, however, is also true, that in every country, Italy included, US included, the divisions really hold us back in a very practical way. When it is, as Professor von Braun said, sort of an us versus them idea, or when you see it as a zero-sum equation where if someone else benefits, I'll lose, it just is enormously destructive, and it's hard to make progress. And if we can address that as we go forward in whatever work we do, we really make progress, and without it, we don't. And it just holds us back in so many ways. As I say, in every place I've worked, this has been the case. In Brazil, there was an issue really along political lines. You wouldn't keep up infrastructure if it had been built by the previous governor from a different party. You wouldn't want to give credit to that, so you let the infrastructure go down. Kenya was tribalism, Somalia clan, India caste, US current polarization, I would say. It holds us back. We have to see the sense of solidarity, of community, that we are in fact all in this together. As the Pope says, no one is saved alone. It is not only a deeper meaning, it is a very practical meaning. It is the only way forward. And I think when we look at what to do next, we certainly have a big agenda, again, as Professor von Braun mentioned, from the Food Systems Summit, a very big agenda on what needs to happen within the food system in terms of environmental health, human health, climate change, poverty, hunger is all interrelated. And the larger the circle, the more that we see how really all of us collectively have to do this with solidarity and responsibility, the way we'll go. And I'll stop here and thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and we look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Daniel, thank you. And I think it's very interesting that both you and Pierrot have identified marginalization as a cause of poverty. And Pierrot identified a specific example of the ways to address that marginalization in a very practical way. You've talked about the importance of cooperation, the importance of cooperation being participatory, and that it only really works in those circumstances. We're now going to turn our attention to climate change, and our speaker here is Irene Heemskerk. Irene is the head of the Climate Change Centre of the European Central Bank and previously chair of the Network for Greening the Financial System at Netherlands Bank. She has a master's degree in international European law from Leiden University, and she's going to talk to us now about cooperation in economics. Cooperation in economics is possible in addressing the climate crisis, the role of the European Central Bank. Irene.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be around people again. I think this is the first event I've been since the lockdown, so it's really special in that way. So welcome, hello everyone, and thank you, Chairwoman Tarantola, for the invite to be here. Today I'm going to talk about indeed the economics. Okay, yes, okay, it's better to hear me now, I hope. Indeed, I'm going to talk about cooperation in economics and fighting the climate crisis. And this is a very important topic. And to start with this, I want to start with a quote. It is, if the present growth trends in world population, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits to growth on this planet will be reached sometime within the next 100 years. You might think that this quote came from the latest IPCC report. However, this quote is nearly 50 years old. It is one of the conclusions of the report of the Club of Rome, the limits to growth. And this Club of Rome was just founded a few kilometers down the river here. The Club of Rome rang alarm bells nearly 50 years ago that the impact of the lifestyle and economies would hit the boundaries what the planet can offer us within 1, 2, 3 generations. Still, over the past half century, we've been heading blindly in the same direction of the Fata Morgana, the illusion of endless resources. Can we then only conclude that we have failed miserably in taking a joint responsibility for our lives, our planets, our children's future, that we have failed miserably in cooperation? No doubt that we are late. And yes, we should have started addressing this issue 50 years ago. The latest IPCC report published in August concluded that climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying. Over summer, we have seen wildfires in Greece and Italy. We have seen floods in Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Heat records in Canada, droughts in Iraq, and many, many more extreme weather events all over the globe. All events that have devastating effects on people living in those areas and causing widespread destruction and major damages to agriculture and food production. Some say that we are the first generation to see widespread impact of the climate crisis unfold before our eyes. And yet, we are the last one to address it, to really address it and keep the temperature well below 2 degrees. So yes, we are late. We are very late. But very soon it will be too late. And therefore, we need cooperation now more than ever. As climate change affects all of us, every continent, every country, every human being, we need cooperation on a global, regional, national level by all actors. And in these introductory remarks, I will set out why I'm talking about this today from the European Central Bank. What we at the ECB are doing ourselves and how we are cooperating. Why the ECB cares about climate change? It's pretty simple. It costs money because climate change causes financial risk. It will affect our financial stability, and these risks are now here already. Globally, the past 6 years are the warmest 6 on record. And 22 was the warmest in Europe. In 2022, disasters caused by natural hazards resulted in 210 billion euros of damages. And research showed that 70% of these events were made more likely or more severe by human-caused climate change. So besides the implications for human health and safety, economic activities like basic food security will also be challenged as more frequent heat waves, cyclones, flood and droughts have an unprecedented impact on agriculture. And we are facing the financial impact already. The latest edition of the European Central Bank's Financial Stability Review found that around 80% of the European banks are already exposed to climate-related risk. So these are the physical risks that are happening because the climate is already changing. But there's another financial risk, and that's transition risk, with a lot of governments committing to net zero, to keep the temperature 2 degrees or below, hopefully 1.5. This means that there will be a lot of regulation to steer the economy from a net zero, from carbon intensive to a low carbon, and hopefully a net zero economy. And this will imply changes for our business models, for the way we live. And this also means, of course, if banks have assets or investments in these companies, they will be at risk as well if companies don't do this transformation on time, if we don't transform in time. So physical risk and these transition risk make us feel responsible, and we're taking this responsibility. So this is my second point. What is the ECB doing about this? Well, the ECB has been systematically and consistently been integrating climate and environmental consideration into all its activities. So we've looked at our institution and say, okay, where is it relevant? What can we do? Why is climate change? How does this change in the weather affects our work? What can we do about it? Because it's something new. We just have to realize better what it does to us. And one concrete example, in November last year, the European Central Bank published a guide on climate-related and environmental risk. And we asked banks to say, okay, what are you doing about this? Do you see this risk? And if banks realize, okay, there's a risk involved, hopefully they engage with the companies they invest in and talk about it. How do you transform to net zero? So this is how we see hopefully raise awareness and get people acting on this. But fortunately, the European Central Bank's commitment to further incorporating the climate and environmental crisis into our tasks and our responsibilities is shared by an increasing number of central banks and supervisors across the world. And this leads me to my third point on cooperation, because no doubt we need to work together. This is my task at head of the Climate Change Center at the European Central Bank, to really make sure that inside the ECB people work together, because it affects so many different, the portfolios of so many colleagues. So how do we work together? How do we learn from each other? This is what I do at the European Central Bank, but we also cooperate with a larger group, with everybody. I think the deputy governor of the Bank of Italy also said, like, they're doing the work on the G20. So every international fora, G7, G20, the IMF, the World Bank, everywhere there's climate on the agenda. So in a way, this is hopeful, I think. So we really need to see how can we make a structural change? How can we make the current regulatory framework to address climate change? And how do we do our economic modeling on this? So as you can imagine, hopefully it's not an easy task. We cannot do this overnight. But we are doing this together. And there's one concrete example I want to share with you, and that's the Central Banks and Supervisors Network for Greening the Financial System. This group was created 4 years ago by 8 central banks and supervisors. It was a group of peers across the globe. They are all recognizing that we needed to address climate change, all recognizing that we just didn't know how to do this yet, and all seeing the benefit and having the drive to collaborate. So we collaborate to better understand the impact of climate change and to better consider its implications in every area of our activity, from supervision to monetary policy, from managing our assets to preserving financial stability. And the good news is that many other central banks and financial supervisors have joined. So 4 years ago, we were 8. Today, this group is around 100. Well, those growth numbers you would like to see in a lot of good things, right? And they're not just like, of course, developed countries, but they're also small island states are members, countries in Africa, emerging markets in emerging central banks from emerging economies or developing economies in Asia. And also big superpowers like the US, India, China, and Japan. The NGFS, this network, has been the driving force in accelerating the work of central banks to address climate change. And if I look back over the past 4 years, and I think what was really the key success to this group, I truly believe that it was a joint conviction of every member that also central banks and supervisors have a role to play. So a club of the willing. We all thought, yes, let's do this together. But so far I've focused on the role of central banks, but each and every one has a vital role to play, of course. And I'm happy to hear all the activities that the European Commission is taking on this, because that's also because politicians are really in the leads for this. And I hope in 2 weeks' time, when we have the COP26 in Glasgow, I sincerely hope that the world leaders will come up with bold plans and actions to keep temperatures well below 2 degrees. To finish off, I want to allude on what I think Monsignor Gallagher just said. It was hope. Because we're talking a bit like floods, wildfires, drought. That causes fear. And fear can paralyze people. if we think about hope and think about a future where we want to go, think about the activities we are doing now, help us to have a better air, better breathe, have food security, have dry feed in wetlands, keep it. So to build this narrative on where they want to go, and not just focus on like the disasters that are happening now, but see, okay, what is the narrative where we want to go? And I think the foundation can play a really important role in this. Solidarity, cooperation, responsibility, they are all key drivers for my work. They guide me in my work every day when I go up. They drive me to go there. And they were taught to me when I grew up with my education. So if the foundation could help build this narrative and teach the meaning of cooperation, solidarity, and responsibility, I think there we cooperate really on all fronts. So thank you very much.